Ian Lees-Galloway.
Thank you very much, Mr Speaker. Well, can I start by saying that I am a little bit surprised at the Green and Māori Party positions on this bill. And I've listened closely to the contributions from Kevin Haig and Rahui Kātane, and it does seem as though they're keeping an open mind at this point in time. But really, I think that once they do hear the submissions at Select Committee, and once they've actually looked through this bill properly, then they will shift their position closer to the Labour position, which is to oppose this bill. Because, Mr Speaker, if ever there was an example, we've got plenty of them, but here's just another example that this government is not working for ordinary New Zealanders, because it is ordinary New Zealanders who own this land. The South Island High Country is one of New Zealand's most precious state assets. And what this bill proposes is to reduce the rent that the Crown can actually receive from that asset. The rents the Crown receives should be fair, and they should reflect the value of the land. That's how every other landlord would do it. That's what the National Party would expect from a private landlord. They would say property rights are important and we need to uphold property rights, and a private landlord should get to set a fair market rent. But for some reason, they seem to believe the Crown should not be allowed to do that. This government is intent on undermining public property rights. Because not only are we seeing an undermining or an erosion of the rent that can be received from these properties, but actually there is a massive flow-on effect. And this is the bit where I think the Greens are going to come round, because at tenure review, some of this land gets privatised, and tenure review is a process where some of the land gets shifted into the dock estate, and the land which is quality pastoral farming land actually gets privatised, and money changes hands. And what we've seen over the years is an absolute rot of the tenure review system, where private landowners get the land for an absolute pittance. The Crown can't actually get a reasonable and fair price for the land, and then those landowners get all the windfall profits from that land. And it's just simply unfair that the vast majority, 4.4 million New Zealanders who own this land, do not get the windfall profits. Meanwhile, the 231 leases, that 231 are getting all the profits and all the benefits out of this at the expense of 4.4 million New Zealanders. The windfall profits mean that farmers will be in a better position to freehold their properties. They are in a better position to on-sell a part or all of the farm, and that gives them windfall profits. And Mr Speaker, we have already seen this happening. Of the 77 runs that have completed tenure review between 1992 and 2008, at least 28 of the new landowners have on-sold 176 parcels of newly freehold land. Those 28 new owners paid the Crown $6.9 million to freehold that land, and they have realised $134 million after on-selling 45,266 hectares, or 44% of the land that was freeholded. So 44% of what was valued at $6.9 million has ended up with a windfall profits of $134 million. That, Mr Speaker, is a massive transfer of wealth from 4.4 million New Zealanders to a tiny number of people, 28. 4.4 million New Zealanders have lost out so that 28 of the National Party's mates could make just under $130 million. It is an outrage. It is an absolute outrage. But I bet there were some good donations out of that. But here's the thing. Because if the leases will argue, and the government is arguing, that the leases cannot afford the full market rent, well, If they can't afford the full market rent, a discount is already available. They can apply for a discount. Do you know, Mr. Speaker, how many of those lessees applied for a discount? Can anybody guess? Zero, nada, none, not a one. Nobody applied for a discount. And yet apparently it is absolutely outrageous that the government expects a fair market valuation on the land so that it can ask a rent of, would you believe, 2% of the total value of the land. But it's so outrageous that no one could afford it, but not one of those lessees applied for the rent discount. They were told about it. They were told about it 3 times, no less. They had plenty of opportunity to apply for a discount, but they didn't. Why? It's a very good question. Why don't you apply for a discount if you think you can't pay for the rent? Well, because there's another option. Challenge the full rental valuation, and that's exactly what these lessees did. In fact, I've heard it from the government. I believe it's about 113 lessees have applied for their rental assessments to be revalued to the Land Valuation Tribunal. Why would you do that? Because if you get an actual revaluation of the lease, that diminishes the value of the land, so that when you get to 10-year review and there's an opportunity to privatise the land, you can get the land for a lower value. If the discount was applied for and it was acknowledged that the full market valuation on the rental still existed, but because of particular circumstances a discount was given, then that would secure the full valuation of the land, and that way the Crown would get to realise the full value of that land when it gets privatised. But no! That's not what the lessees want to do. That's not what this government wants to do. It wants to make sure that all those windfall profits go to their few mates in the High Country Accord at the expense of the rest of New Zealand. There is an agenda going on here. That is to devalue a Crown asset. It's one thing to go around selling off all our Crown assets left, right and centre, but here we have an asset that the government is receiving rent on. It is a dividend that comes into the government coffers that can be used for everybody, but no, the government wants to devalue that so that it can reduce the amount of income coming in, because those gains that come from those leases rightfully belong to all New Zealanders. And it is quite obvious what this government is trying to do. So in the first instance, they're undermining the dividend and they're reducing the dividend that all New Zealanders can receive from it. And in the second instance, they're ensuring that the windfall profits go to a tiny few and do not get passed on to the majority of New Zealanders. Now, the government would have you think that by taking this position, the Labour Party is somehow anti-farmer. Aha, there we go. I just wanted to check, make sure. Yes, okay. The government would have you think that we are somehow anti-farmer. Well, that's simply not true. Let's just look at this a little bit more closely. Who actually benefits from this? Is it the farming community at large? Is it New Zealand's entire rural community? Or is it in fact 231 lessees, not all of whom are farming? That's who benefits from it. 231 lessees, not all of whom are farming. Some of them are foreign rock stars who just enjoy living on that particular part of in that particular land, with all the views that they get and the general pleasant lifestyle that they get from it. No, every other farmer in the country either has to pay a fair valuation if they purchase the land, or they have to pay a fair market valuation if they're leasing the land. This isn't some pro-farmer policy. This does nothing for most farmers in New Zealand. This only works for a tiny, tiny few people living in the high country of the South Island. These lessees are getting very special treatment from this government, and I'd like to know why the government is giving such a small number of people such special treatment, because it is to the disadvantage of all New Zealanders. It is to the disadvantage of the rest of the rural community. It is to the disadvantage of the government of the day who receive a dividend from this land. It is just unbelievable that the government are trying to sell us a story about how they're supporting high country farmers. You know, I think the government would have you think that the people they're working for here are blokes riding around on horseback saying good on you mate to one another, but it's not. It's a tiny, tiny few, and that is to the disadvantage of all New Zealanders, because this government is not working for New Zealand.
I call Sandra